Hey there, family, and welcome back to Bible Lessons. It's always such a blessing to gather together around God's Word, isn't it? This is the place where we roll up our sleeves and really dig into the timeless truths of Scripture, uncovering those powerful lessons that speak right into our lives today. You know, the Bible is filled with incredible figures, giants of the faith, like Abraham, David, Paul. But sometimes, nestled in the shadows of these towering figures, are others whose stories shine just as brightly, if we only take the time to look. Today, friends, we're going to pull back the curtain on one such remarkable woman, Zipporah, the first wife of Moses. Now, her name might not be the first one that jumps to mind when you think of Exodus heroes. But let me tell you, Zipporah's life was absolutely pivotal. She stepped onto the stage of salvation history at a crucial moment, and her journey alongside Moses is woven deeply into the fabric of God's unfolding, divine plan for his people. Her story isn't just history. It's a powerful testament to courage that resonates across the centuries, a complex tapestry of cultural navigation, and carries a spiritual weight that can feel breathtakingly relevant. Have you ever been stopped in your tracks reading Exodus chapter 4? Have you ever wrestled with that shocking, almost terrifying moment where Moses, the man just chosen by God for a world-changing mission, suddenly finds himself facing the lethal wrath of the Almighty himself? It's a passage that sends shivers down your spine. And why was it Zipporah, his Midianite wife, who instinctively knew what to do? Why did her swift, decisive, and perhaps even agonizing action avert disaster in that life or death encounter that has left brilliant scholars pondering for ages? Join us today as we seek to understand the mystery and the might of Zipporah, a woman whose faith and fortitude helped preserve the leader God had chosen and shape the very destiny of Israel. We'll explore who she was, the challenges she undoubtedly faced, and the profound, often uncomfortable, lessons her life holds for our own walk with Christ. So, grab your Bible, maybe a cup of coffee, and settle in. If you're blessed by our time together today, would you do us a favor? Take a moment to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and maybe share it with your small group, your family, or anyone seeking to grow deeper in the Word. Let's keep building this community, uncovering God's wisdom together. Let's dive in. Okay, let's step into that moment when Moses' world turned upside down. Picture this, friends. Moses, a man raised in the dazzling splendor of Pharaoh's palace, yet carrying the secret fire of his Hebrew heritage in his heart. He sees the brutal reality of his people's suffering, the sting of the taskmaster's whip, the crushing weight of slavery, and something inside him snaps. Exodus chapter 2 tells us he goes out to his people, sees their burdens, and witnesses an Egyptian mercilessly beating a Hebrew, one of his own brethren. In a flash of righteous fury, perhaps mixed with the impulsiveness of youth and a sense of princely power, Moses looks this way and that, sees no one, and strikes the Egyptian down, burying him in the sand. Can you imagine the adrenaline, the shock, the immediate weight of what he'd done? He acted out of a sense of justice, yes, but it was justice carried out by his own hand, outside of God's timing and method. A tragic, world-altering mistake. The very next day, the chilling reality hits him like a physical blow. He tries to intervene between two fighting Hebrews, and one throws it back in his face. Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Ice must have shot through Moses' veins. His secret was out. The whispers started, and soon Pharaoh himself hears of it. The refuge of the palace becomes a death trap. The ruler of Egypt now seeks Moses' life. Imagine the terror. The man who walked the halls of power is now a hunted fugitive. His identity, his security, his future all shattered in an instant. His world collapsing. Moses does the only thing he can. He flees. He runs for his life, escaping the borders of Egypt, heading out into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Think about that journey, the scorching sun, the desolate landscape, stripped of his fine linens, his status, utterly alone with his guilt and fear. He arrives in the land of Midian, exhausted, a broken man, sitting down by a well, perhaps feeling like his life is effectively over. A prince has become a pauper, a potential leader now in exile. But friends, God is never finished, even when we are. Even in our running, God is orchestrating. At this well, such an ordinary place, yet so often the stage for extraordinary divine appointments in Scripture, think of Isaac's servant finding Rebekah, or Jacob meeting Rachel. Moses encounters the 7 daughters of Reuel, also known as Jethro, the priest of Midian. They come to draw water for their father's flock, but trouble finds them. Other shepherds arrive, rough and aggressive, driving the women away. And here we see that core of Moses' character flare up again, the injustice. But this time, it's different. No impulsive violence. Instead, Exodus 2:17 tells us, Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. The man of action steps in, but now with protective strength, serving these vulnerable women. A simple act of kindness from a fugitive stranger. But in that moment, don't you see a glimmer of the future shepherd of Israel? Defending the defenseless, providing for the thirsty flock. This act of courage and kindness doesn't go unnoticed. When the daughters return early to their father, Jethro, surprised, asks why. Their answer points directly to Moses. An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock. Jethro, a man of wisdom and hospitality, immediately invites this helpful stranger in. Look at the divine choreography here. Moses, running from his failure, runs straight into God's provision. In his deepest despair, fleeing judgment, he finds refuge and performs an act of service that opens the door to his next chapter. God was working, even when Moses thought he had ruined everything. What an encouragement for us today. So there he is, Moses, the fugitive prince, invited into the home of Jethro, the Midianite priest. Can you just feel the shift? From the desolate wilderness, the gnawing fear of pursuit, the crushing weight of isolation, suddenly, he's offered shelter, food, community. Jethro, discerning the character of this Egyptian who acted so honorably at the well, extends more than just temporary hospitality. He sees something in Moses. And then comes this incredible moment in Exodus 21. It simply says, "And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter, Zipporah." Stop there for a second. Moses was content. Think about that word. After the turmoil, the running, the stripping away of everything he knew here, in this foreign land, among these people not his own, Moses finds contentment. It speaks volumes, doesn't it? It suggests a deep sense of peace, of safety, of acceptance washing over him after so long on the run. The storm inside begins to calm. He agrees to stay, to put down roots, however tentative they might feel at first. And the ultimate sign of this acceptance, this grafting into a new life, Jethro gives him Zipporah as his wife. This isn't just an arranged marriage according to custom. It's a profound embrace. It's Jethro saying, "You are one of us now. You belong here. You are family." For Moses, who had lost his connection to both his Hebrew roots and his Egyptian upbringing, this must have felt like an anchor dropped in a stormy sea. Zipporah, whose name means bird, becomes his partner, the tangible evidence that he has found a place to land, a place to build a nest after his desperate flight. Imagine the relief, the gratitude, the quiet joy of finding belonging when you felt utterly lost. This wasn't just a footnote, family. This marriage sealed Moses' integration into Midianite life. He wasn't just a guest anymore. He was Jethro's son-in-law. And the proof is right there at the beginning of Exodus chapter 3. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. Look at that picture. The man raised in Pharaoh's courts, educated in all the wisdom of Egypt, is now out in the fields, tending sheep. For years, tradition suggests 40 long years this becomes his life. Day in, day out, learning the rhythms of the flock, the contours of the wilderness, the patience of a shepherd. Can you imagine the humbling? The stripping away of pride, of reliance on worldly status. He truly becomes part of Zipporah's family, part of the fabric of their lives. He finds a wife, has children, will meet them later, and settles into a routine far removed from the drama of his past. This deep integration, this becoming family in a foreign land, wasn't just a waiting period. It was essential preparation. God was shaping the future deliverer in the crucible of ordinary life, teaching him humility, patience, and the shepherd's heart he would need to lead God's own flock. Finding Zipporah, finding this family, finding this contentment, it was all part of God's intricate plan, providing stability and a new identity before the burning bush moment that would change everything once again. What a testament to how God uses the quiet years, the unexpected relationships, to prepare us for his purposes. All right, family, let's take a moment and really consider who Zipporah was before she ever met Moses. Because understanding her roots, her heritage, helps us appreciate the incredible woman she became and the unique role God called her to play. She wasn't an Israelite born into the covenant promises given directly to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She came from a different branch of the family tree, and that matters. Who were the Midianites? Genesis 25 gives us the genealogy. They were descendants of Abraham, not through Sarah, but through his later wife, Keturah. Midian was one of their sons. So, isn't that fascinating? They weren't complete strangers to the knowledge of the one true God. Abraham's legacy, however diluted it might have become over generations, likely echoed in their traditions. They were kin, albeit distant cousins to the Israelites. They were primarily a nomadic people, masters of the harsh, arid landscapes of what we now call Northwest Arabia. Imagine Zipporah growing up in that environment, resourceful, resilient, deeply connected to the rhythms of the desert, a stark contrast to the sophisticated, river-centric world Moses knew in Egypt. But here's where it gets really compelling. Zipporah wasn't just any Midianite woman. She was the daughter of Jethro or Reuel. The names seem interchangeable, who the Bible explicitly calls the priest of Midian. Now, hold on. A priest? What does that tell us? It tells us the Midianites weren't just wandering tribes. They had established religious practices, rituals, a sense of the divine. Jethro wasn't some vague spiritual figure. He held a recognized office. Now, we have to be careful here. Does priest of Midian mean he worshipped Yahweh exactly as the Israelites were called to? Not necessarily. The ancient Near East was often a melting pot of beliefs. While the Midianites, tracing back to Abraham, likely acknowledged the God of Abraham, it's possible their worship incorporated other elements, perhaps acknowledging other deities alongside him. A practice called syncretism, which was common then, but strictly forbidden for Israel under their specific covenant. This cultural and religious background Zipporah brought into her marriage with Moses surely added layers of complexity. Think about the dinner table conversations. Moses, steeped in the stories of the patriarchs and soon to be called by Yahweh in a profoundly personal way, and Zipporah, shaped by her own people's understanding of God. But let's not jump to negative conclusions about Jethro or Midianite faith too quickly. Look at Exodus chapter 18. After God miraculously delivers Israel from Egypt, Jethro hears about it and comes to Moses, bringing Zipporah and her sons. And what does Jethro say? "Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods." And then, verse 12, this gives me chills. "Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God." Picture that scene. Jethro, the Midianite priest, leads worship, offering sacrifices to Yahweh, and Aaron, the future high priest of Israel, along with the elders, join him in this sacred meal in God's presence. This isn't conflict. It's communion. It shows profound respect and a shared acknowledgement of God's power. Jethro is portrayed as wise, discerning, and genuinely reverent. This was the spiritual environment Zipporah came from, a heritage connected to Abraham, led by a father who demonstrably revered God and could recognize his mighty acts. While distinct from Israel's covenant, it wasn't necessarily devoid of genuine faith. This context is crucial for understanding the woman Zipporah was knowledgeable, likely devout in her own way, and possessing a spiritual awareness shaped by this unique background. Her background wasn't a liability. It was part of the unique tapestry God was weaving. All right, family, let's pause here for a moment and really wrap our minds and hearts around who Zipporah was before Moses ever stumbled, exhausted and broken, into her life by that Midianite well. Because understanding her roots, her spiritual soil, it changes everything. It adds such incredible depth to the woman God chose, and it helps us grasp the sheer wonder of God's plan unfolding through people we might initially see as outsiders. Zipporah wasn't an Israelite. She wasn't born breathing the air thick with the covenant promises passed down through Isaac and Jacob. No, her lineage traces back differently, through Abraham's other family line, the one he started later in life with Keturah, as Genesis 25 lays out for us. Midian was one of their sons. Now, just let that sink in for a second. Isn't that breathtaking? This means Zipporah's ancestors heard the name of Abraham, heard of the one true God. That knowledge may be faint like an echo across desert canyons, may be mingled with other ideas over time, but it was there. They weren't total strangers to the divine light. They were kin, distant cousins in faith's vast family tree. Imagine Zipporah's upbringing. Not in the sophisticated, predictable Nile Valley Moses knew, but out in the wild, rugged terrain of Midian. A nomadic life, learning resilience under the scorching sun, reading the stars, understanding the harsh beauty and real dangers of the wilderness. Resourceful, tough, perhaps possessing a quiet strength forged by the demanding landscape. What a different world. The priest of Midian, Exodus 2:16, 18:1. Whoa. Stop right there. A priest? What profound weight that carries. It shouts to us that the Midianites weren't just wandering aimlessly. They had structure, they had rituals, they had a recognized spiritual leadership. Jethro held a sacred office. He was the spiritual guide for his people. Can you feel the significance of that? Zipporah grew up in the household of a man dedicated to mediating between the human and the divine. Now, let's tread carefully but honestly. Does priest of Midian automatically mean Jethro worshipped Yahweh with the exclusive devotion demanded of Israel? The ancient world was complex. It's possible that while honoring the God of their ancestor, Abraham, Midianite worship might have included other local traditions or deities, something strictly forbidden for Israel. Imagine the potential undercurrents in Zipporah's marriage to Moses, a man being prepared for radical, exclusive covenant relationship with Yahweh. The conversations, the different perspectives on faith, it adds a layer of very real human complexity. But oh, friends, Don't let that possibility cloud the astonishing picture painted in Exodus chapter 18. Jethro hears about the miracles, the plagues, the Red Sea parting, God's overwhelming victory. He travels to Moses, bringing Zipporah and their sons. And listen to the passionate declaration bursting from his soul. Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. Exodus 18:10-11. Goosebumps, right? This is raw, heartfelt recognition of Yahweh's supreme power. And then, verse 12, it's a scene that should make our spirits soar. Jethro, this Midianite priest, leads in worship. He brings burnt offerings and sacrifices to Yahweh. And who joins him? Aaron himself, Israel's future high priest, and all the elders. They eat a sacred meal together before God. This isn't friction. It's fellowship. It's a stunning moment of unity, centered on acknowledging the God who saves. Jethro radiates wisdom, discernment, and genuine awe. This was the spiritual atmosphere Zipporah breathed. A connection back to Abraham, a father deeply engaged with the divine, capable of recognizing and celebrating Yahweh's mighty acts. Her heritage wasn't a spiritual wasteland. It was a unique landscape where seeds of faith, however different, had taken root. Okay, family, buckle up. We're heading into one of the most startling, most debated, and frankly, most terrifying encounters in the entire Old Testament. Moses has had the burning bush experience. God has commissioned him, empowered him, given him the signs, the staff, the promises. He's finally obeying, heading back to Egypt with Zipporah and their sons to confront Pharaoh and deliver God's people. Everything seems set, right? The mission is underway. And then, chaos. Utter, terrifying, divine chaos. Exodus chapter 4, verses 24-26. Let me read it, and just feel the jolt. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him, Moses, and sought to put him to death. Whoa. Stop. Read that again. The Lord Yahweh himself, the God of the burning bush, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob met Moses and sought to put him to death. Can you even process that? The whiplash is staggering. The God who just called him now intends to kill him. What is happening? Imagine the sheer panic, the confusion, the terror gripping that family at this roadside inn. Was it an angelic messenger executing God's wrath? Was it a direct, overwhelming divine presence? The text is stark, leaving us breathless. Moses, God's chosen deliverer, is suddenly facing lethal judgment from the very one who sent him. Why? Why this sudden, terrifying shift? The text doesn't explicitly state the reason, but the context points overwhelmingly in one direction. Moses had failed in a fundamental act of covenant faithfulness. Genesis 17 laid it out crystal clear. Circumcision was the non-negotiable sign of the covenant between God and Abraham's descendants. Every male among you shall be circumcised. It shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. Genesis 17:10-11. This wasn't just a minor detail, friends. It was the visible mark of belonging, of obedience, of being set apart for God. And somehow, Moses, the man destined to receive God's law, the leader called to guide God's people in obedience, had neglected to circumcise his own son, likely Gershom, or perhaps Eleazar. Can you fathom the gravity? Maybe Zipporah had resisted, coming from a different cultural background. Maybe in the whirlwind of fleeing Egypt years ago, or the focus on the new mission now, it was overlooked. But whatever the reason, in God's eyes, it was a critical failure. The leader of the covenant people was himself standing outside a core requirement of that covenant concerning his own child. It was an offense that, in this critical moment of embarking on God's mission, brought divine wrath to his doorstep. And in that moment of terrifying crisis, when Moses is apparently incapacitated either by illness, divine assault, or paralyzed by fear, who acts? Zipporah. This woman, the Midianite, the outsider. Verse 25. Then Zipporah took a flint knife and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it. Picture the raw intensity. A flint knife, not just any blade, but often used for sacred rituals, connecting this emergency act to ancient, holy practice. Think Joshua 5:2, where flint knives are used for mass circumcision. She doesn't hesitate. She sees the danger, understands the need perhaps more clearly than Moses in that moment, and performs the painful, necessary cut herself. And then she touches his feet. Whose feet? The Hebrew is ambiguous. Moses' feet? The son's feet or genitals? The feet of the divine messenger seeking Moses' life? Whatever the specific gesture, it's an act laden with meaning, applying the blood, the sign of the covenant fulfilled, perhaps as an appeasement, a declaration. And then she cries out those electrifying, enigmatic words, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." A bridegroom of blood, because of the circumcision. Exodus 4:26. Her decisive action, her grasp of the covenant's deadly seriousness, works. So the Lord let him alone. Zipporah saves Moses. Let that sink in. The Midianite woman, through her quick thinking, her courage, and her understanding of covenant requirements, preserves the life of God's chosen leader. She wasn't just a bystander. She was an active participant in salvation history, demonstrating a profound spiritual insight and a fierce protective love. In this terrifying moment, she embodies the faithfulness that Moses tragically lacked. What a woman of faith! So, after that incredibly intense Bridegroom of Blood incident, the narrative takes an interesting turn concerning Zipporah. As Moses gears up for the massive, earth-shattering confrontation with Pharaoh, leading Israel out of bondage, Zipporah and their sons seem to fade into the background for a time. Where did they go? Exodus chapter 18, verses 2 and 3, gives us the answer, though it feels almost understated. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. He sent her away. Pause on that for a moment. Why? The Bible doesn't give us a direct, explicit reason, but think about the heart-wrenching possibilities, especially for a leader stepping into unimaginable danger. Could it have been purely for their safety? Moses was about to walk into the lion's den, confronting the most powerful ruler on earth, demanding the release of his entire workforce. Pharaoh was known for his gentle nature. The plagues, the conflict, it was going to be terrifying, brutal. Perhaps Moses, in a painful act of protective love, sent his wife and young sons back to the relative peace of Midian to shield them from the storm he knew was coming. Can you imagine that conversation? The weight of sending your loved ones away as you walk towards danger? Or perhaps there were cultural tensions brewing? We get a hint of this later in Numbers 12. We'll definitely dig into that. Zipporah was still a Midianite among the Israelites. Maybe Moses sensed discomfort, prejudice, or potential friction that would only add burden during the stressful Exodus journey. Sending her back to her father might have been a way to protect her from feeling like an outsider, from bearing the brunt of whispers or sideways glances during an already fraught time. And then there's the sheer, crushing weight of the mission itself. God's call on Moses was all-consuming. Leading millions out of slavery, facing down a tyrant, mediating God's power, this wasn't a part-time job. Maybe the demands were so intense, the spiritual focus required so absolute, that Moses felt this temporary separation was a painful necessity to fully dedicate himself, undistracted, to the monumental task God had given him. Every leader, everyone called to significant ministry, knows the tension between devotion to God's work and devotion to family. It's a heavy burden. Whatever the reason, or combination of reasons, they were separated during those dramatic days of deliverance. But then, after the dust settles, after the Red Sea parts, after Israel is safe on the other side, comes the reunion. And oh, what a beautiful picture Exodus 18 paints. Jethro, wise and supportive, hears all that God has done and brings Zipporah, Gershom, and Eleazar back to Moses in the wilderness encampment near the mountain of God. Verse 7 describes the meeting. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Feel the emotion there. The deep respect, the affection, the relief flooding through Moses as he welcomes his family back. Imagine Zipporah's relief, seeing her husband alive, victorious, the leader God ordained him to be. Picture the boys, Gershom, whose name means, I have been a foreigner, a reminder of Moses' exile, and Eleazar meaning, my God is my helper, celebrating God's deliverance from Pharaoh's sword, now reunited with their father. This wasn't just a personal family moment. It symbolized wholeness, restoration. The leader's family, separated by the demands of the mission, brought back together once God's initial deliverance was accomplished. It underscores the vital importance God places on family and kinship, even amidst world-changing events. What a poignant reminder of the sacrifices often required in service to God and the joy He brings in restoration. Family, sometimes the hardest challenges don't come from outside enemies like Pharaoh, but from within our own ranks, even from those closest to us. We're heading into Numbers chapter 12 now, and it's a painful, deeply unsettling episode that shines a harsh light on jealousy, prejudice, and the devastating impact of criticism against God's chosen leader and his family. The verse hits like a sudden storm cloud. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Numbers 12:1. Stop right there. Miriam, Moses' own sister, the prophetess who led the women in song after the Red Sea crossing. And Aaron, his brother, the designated high priest. They are speaking against Moses. And what's the stated reason? His wife. Now, the term Cushite typically referred to someone from Cush, the region south of Egypt, roughly modern-day Sudan or Ethiopia. This strongly implies the woman was dark-skinned, of African descent. And here's where it gets debated. Was this Cushite woman Zipporah? Some scholars think so, perhaps arguing Midianite and Cushite were sometimes used interchangeably, or that Zipporah had African ancestry through Midianite connections. Others believe Moses may have taken a second wife after Zipporah perhaps passed away or returned permanently to Midian, though the Bible doesn't say this. Honestly, whether it was Zipporah or another woman, the core issue feels disturbingly similar. Miriam and Aaron are using Moses' wife, specifically referencing her foreign and likely racial background as ammunition. Was this the real reason, or just a convenient excuse to mask their deeper issue? Verse 2 reveals their true motive. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? Ah, there it is. Jealousy. Resentment over Moses' unique position, his unparalleled access to God. They felt overlooked, sidelined. And tragically, they target his wife, his marriage, possibly playing on existing prejudices within the camp about her otherness, to undermine Moses' authority. Can you imagine the sting of that? Your own siblings, using your spouse, potentially targeting her ethnicity or race as a weapon against you, highlighting her foreignness. Deuteronomy 7 had warned Israel against intermarrying with certain Canaanite nations, lest they lead Israel into idolatry. But there's no hint this Cushite wife did that. This feels like raw prejudice wrapped in a thin veil of supposed concern, fueled by bitter jealousy. How devastating for Moses. How painful and isolating it must have been for his wife, whoever she was, to be the subject of such critical whispers from the leadership circle itself. And the Lord heard at Numbers 12:2. Oh, friends, let that be a sobering reminder. God hears the whispers, the criticisms, the slander spoken in private, and he takes it personally when his chosen servant is attacked, especially by those who should know better. God summons Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to the tent of meeting. His anger burns hot. He affirms Moses' unique relationship with him. I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Numbers 12:8. And then he asks them pointedly, why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? The judgment falls swiftly and symbolically. As God departs, Miriam is struck with leprosy, her skin turning white as snow. Numbers 12:10. Think about the potential devastating irony here. Criticizing Moses, possibly over a dark-skinned wife, and Miriam herself is afflicted with the condition that makes her skin starkly white, rendering her ritually unclean and forcing her outside the camp. It's a visible, humiliating rebuke. Aaron, horrified, immediately pleads with Moses for forgiveness and healing for Miriam. And Moses, showing incredible grace and humility, the very man they attacked, cries out to God, "Oh God, please heal her, please." Numbers 12:13. God tempers the judgment, but doesn't erase the consequence. Miriam must remain outside the camp for 7 days, a public display of her sin and a time for repentance. The entire community waits for her return. This painful incident reveals the ugliness of prejudice, the poison of jealousy within leadership, and God's fierce defense of his chosen servants. So, as we draw our time together to a close, let's just sit with the powerful story of Zipporah for a moment. Yes, the Bible gives us glimpses rather than a full portrait, but oh, what impactful glimpses they are. More than just Moses' wife, she emerges from the shadows as a woman of incredible substance, faith, and fierce courage. Think about it. Her quick thinking and grasp of covenant faithfulness literally saved Moses' life at that critical moment at the inn. Her resilience, likely facing cultural differences and perhaps even prejudice within the Israelite camp, speaks volumes about her inner strength. She was a partner to Moses during his formative years in Midian and stood beside him through unimaginable upheaval. Her story isn't just about supporting a great leader. It's about her own spiritual insight, her decisive action, and her unwavering place in God's unfolding drama. Zipporah reminds us that God uses everyone, even those the world might deem outsiders, in mighty ways. Her legacy challenges us to look beyond the surface, to recognize the quiet strength and profound faith often found in unexpected places. May her story inspire us all. God bless you, family.